The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in after a storm, when the world outside is washed clean, but inside, the ache of what's missing lingers in every shadow. I stood in my late wife's bedroom, the morning sun slanting through the curtains, dust motes swirling in the golden light. Her jewelry box sat open on the dresser, velvet trays lined with memories, the silver bracelet she wore on our first date, the gold ring she'd inherited from her mother, and, until yesterday, the diamond necklace I'd given her on our 20th anniversary. That necklace was all I had left of her, a piece of her I could hold on to when the nights grew long and the house felt too big. But now, the velvet slot where it belonged was empty. My heart pounded as I searched the drawers, the bedside table, even the pockets of her old coats, but the necklace was gone. I called out for my son, David, my voice sharper than I intended. He appeared in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes flickering with guilt. "Dad, I needed money for the trip. I sold it." The words hit me like a punch, the air leaving my lungs. "You sold your mother's necklace? For what, beer and hotel rooms?" David looked away, shame burning in his cheeks. "I'm sorry. I didn't think you'd notice. I wanted to go with my friends. I'll get it back, I promise." I stared at him, anger and heartbreak warring inside me. "You can't just buy back what you've thrown away, David. That necklace was her." He mumbled another apology and disappeared down the hall, leaving me alone with my grief and a growing sense of urgency. I grabbed the pawn shop receipt from his desk and dialed the number, my hands shaking. "I'm calling about a diamond necklace you bought yesterday," I said, my voice tight. The man on the other end hesitated, then said, "Sir, you won't believe what we discovered inside the pendant." My breath caught. "What do you mean?" He lowered his voice, as if afraid someone might overhear. "The pendant opens. There's a hidden compartment. We found something inside, something you need to see." My mind raced. I'd never known the necklace could open. My wife had worn it every day, but she'd never mentioned a secret. "What did you find?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The man paused, then said, "I think you should come down here, sir. Bring ID. And be prepared." I hung up, my heart pounding, 1,000 questions swirling in my mind. What could my wife have hidden in the necklace? Why had she never told me? And what would I find when I opened it? As I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, I realized that the loss of the necklace was only the beginning. The real story, the one that would test my faith, my family, and everything I thought I knew about the woman I loved, was just beginning to unfold. The drive to the pawn shop was a blur of red lights and anxious glances at the clock, my mind racing with questions I was afraid to answer. The city felt different that morning, every face at a crosswalk, every car that passed, seemed to be part of a world I no longer trusted. I replayed the conversation with David over and over, the shame in his eyes, the way he'd shrunk from my anger. I wanted to be furious, to shout, but beneath the rage was a deeper ache, the fear that I'd failed as a father, that I'd let my grief blind me to the cracks forming in my own family. When I finally pulled up to the pawn shop, the neon sign flickered in the gray light, casting a sickly glow over the cracked sidewalk. Inside, the place was cluttered with forgotten treasures, guitars, watches, old cameras, and jewelry cases that sparkled with other people's memories. The man behind the counter looked up as I entered, recognition flickering in his eyes. "You must be Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice low. "I'm glad you came." He reached beneath the counter and produced the necklace, its diamonds catching the light, the pendant heavier than I remembered. "We were cleaning it for display when we noticed a seam," he explained, his fingers deftly pressing a tiny latch I'd never seen. The pendant popped open with a soft click, revealing a hidden compartment no bigger than a thimble. Inside was a tightly folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, and a tiny silver key. My breath caught as I reached for the note, my hands trembling. The handwriting was unmistakable, my wife's, looping and elegant. "If you're reading this, it means you've lost me, but you haven't lost everything. The key is to the safety deposit box at First National. There you'll find the truth about our family, and a gift for you and David. I love you. M." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. The pawn shop owner watched in silence, his curiosity obvious but his respect even more so. "We didn't read the rest," he said quietly. "We figured it was private." I nodded, gratitude and dread warring inside me. I paid for the necklace, tucking it into my pocket along with the key and the note. As I stepped back into the street, the world seemed sharper, the air colder. I called David, my voice softer than before. "Meet me at the bank. There's something you need to see." He hesitated, then agreed, his voice thick with regret. As I drove to First National, the questions multiplied. What had my wife hidden from us? What truth was so important she'd locked it away, trusting only a secret compartment in a necklace to keep it safe? And what would it mean for me, for David, for the family we'd both tried so hard to hold together? The answers waited in a safety deposit box, and as I parked outside the bank, I realized that the real test was only just beginning. The necklace was no longer just a memory, it was a key to a secret that could change everything. The bank lobby was hushed and cool, the marble floors echoing with the soft click of my shoes as I waited for David to arrive. He came in looking older than his years, his shoulders hunched, his eyes red from a night spent wrestling with guilt. We barely spoke as the manager led us to the vault, the heavy door swinging open with a groan that seemed to vibrate in my bones. The safety deposit box was small, unremarkable, but the key from the necklace fit perfectly. My hands shook as I slid the box from its slot and set it on the table. David stood beside me, silent, his breath shallow. I opened the lid, half expecting to find nothing but old papers, but what lay inside took my breath away. There was a stack of letters, each one addressed in my wife's careful hand, one for me, one for David, and several more marked with names I didn't recognize. Beneath the letters was a velvet pouch, heavier than it looked. I opened it and gasped. Inside were 3 more pieces of jewelry I'd never seen before, each one set with stones that caught the light in a way that made the diamonds in the necklace look dull by comparison. There was also a small, leather-bound journal, its pages filled with my wife's neat script. I picked up the letter addressed to me and unfolded it, my heart pounding. "My love," it began, "if you're reading this, it means the necklace is gone, and I'm sorry for the pain that must have caused. But I needed you to find this, to know the truth about our family. The jewelry belonged to my grandmother, smuggled out of Europe during the war. It's worth far more than the necklace, but I never wanted anyone to know, not even you, until the time was right. I hid it because I was afraid, because secrets have a way of poisoning even the strongest love. But I trust you to do what's right, to protect David, and to forgive him for his mistakes. He's lost, but he's still our son." I handed David his letter, watching as he read, his lips trembling. "Dad, I'm so sorry," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't know. I just wanted to feel free, to have something that was mine. I never meant to hurt you, or Mom." I hugged him, the anger and grief dissolving into something softer, more forgiving. "We all make mistakes, son. What matters is what we do next." We sat in the vault for a long time, reading the journal, piecing together the story of a family that had survived war, loss, and betrayal, only to be nearly undone by secrets and pride. As we left the bank, the jewelry and letters safe in my pocket, I realized that the necklace was never just a keepsake, it was a key, a test, and a gift. The real inheritance was not money or jewels, but the chance to heal, to forgive, and to start again. The world outside felt brighter, the air lighter, as if my wife's spirit was with us, guiding us home. But I knew the journey wasn't over. The pawn shop owner had said there was more to the story, and as we drove back through the city, I felt a new resolve settle in my chest. Whatever secrets remained, I would face them, with David by my side, and with the strength my wife had left us, hidden in plain sight. The drive home from the bank was quiet, the city rolling past in a blur of sunlight and shadow as David stared out the window, the letter from his mother clutched in his hands. I could feel the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on us, the guilt, the relief, the questions that still lingered in the air. When we pulled into the driveway, the house looked different, as if the secrets we'd uncovered had changed the very shape of our lives. We barely had time to set the jewelry and letters on the kitchen table before the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a woman in her 70s, her posture regal, her eyes sharp and searching. She introduced herself as Miriam Weiss, her accent faint but unmistakable. "I saw the news about the necklace," she said, her gaze flicking to the velvet pouch in my hand. "I believe it once belonged to my family." My heart skipped. "You knew my wife?" Miriam nodded, her eyes misting. "We were children together, in Vienna. My parents and hers hid the jewels before the Nazis came. We lost touch after the war, but I never forgot her." She reached into her purse and pulled out an old photograph, two little girls, arms around each other, grinning at the camera. My wife's face was unmistakable, her smile the same one I'd fallen in love with decades later. Miriam's hands trembled as she traced the outline of the photo. "Your wife was brave. She saved my life. I always wondered what happened to her." I invited her in, and we sat at the kitchen table, the afternoon sun slanting through the window as Miriam told her story. She spoke of fear and flight, of families torn apart, of a promise made in the darkness, that if either girl survived, she would protect the other's legacy. As she spoke, David listened, his eyes wide with wonder and shame. "I never knew any of this," he whispered. Miriam smiled gently. "Few do. Some stories are too heavy to share until the time is right." She examined the jewelry, her fingers lingering on a sapphire brooch. "This was my mother's. Your wife must have kept it safe all these years." I felt a surge of gratitude and sorrow, the pain of loss mingling with the joy of connection. Miriam handed me a letter, written in my wife's hand, addressed to both of us. "If you're reading this, it means the past has found you. Forgive each other. Protect what matters. And remember, love is the only inheritance that endures." We sat in silence, the truth settling over us like a blessing and a burden. David reached for my hand, his grip strong. "I'm sorry, Dad. I want to do better. I want to honor her." I nodded, my own eyes wet. "We will, son. Together." As Miriam left, she hugged us both, her voice soft. "Your wife would be proud." That night, as David and I sat by the fire, the letters and jewels between us, I realized that the real treasure was not what we'd found in the bank, but what we'd found in each other, a chance to heal, to forgive, and to carry my wife's legacy forward. But as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that the past wasn't finished with us yet. The next morning, a letter arrived, no return address, just a single line, "You're not the only one looking for the necklace." The real danger, it seemed, was only just beginning. The letter sat on the kitchen table, its message chilling in its simplicity, "You're not the only one looking for the necklace." I stared at it, my mind racing with possibilities. Was it a threat, a warning, or a desperate plea? David hovered nearby, his face pale, the weight of his earlier mistake now compounded by the fear that he'd put us both in danger. I called Carter, my lawyer, and read him the note. His voice was grave. "Franklin, you need to be careful. If the story of the necklace and the hidden jewelry gets out, there are people who might do anything to get their hands on it. I'll call the police, but you should consider moving the valuables to a safer place." I nodded, my resolve hardening. "We'll do it tonight." As dusk fell, David and I packed the jewelry, the letters, and the journal into a locked case and drove to Carter's office, the city lights flickering past in a blur. The streets felt different, every car that lingered behind us, every stranger's glance, every flicker of headlights in the rearview mirror set my nerves on edge. At Carter's office, we handed over the case, and he locked it in his firm's vault, promising to keep it under constant surveillance. "You did the right thing, Franklin," he said. "But you need to be ready for anything." That night, back at the house, I double-checked the locks and sat by the window, a baseball bat within reach. David tried to sleep, but I could hear him pacing, his anxiety a living thing in the darkness. Around midnight, a car slowed outside the house, its headlights off. I watched from the shadows as a figure stepped out, walked up the drive, and slipped a note under the door before disappearing into the night. I waited until the car was gone, then retrieved the note. It was a photograph, my wife, as a young woman, standing with Miriam and a man I didn't recognize. On the back, a message, "The past is never buried. Meet me at the old train station, 10 a.m. tomorrow. Come alone." I showed the photo to David, his eyes wide with fear. "What do we do, Dad?" I took a deep breath, feeling the old courage rise in my chest. "We go. But we do it on our terms." I called Carter and Miriam, filling them in on the latest twist. Miriam's voice was steady. I'll come with you. That man in the photo, he was my brother. He disappeared after the war. If someone is using his memory, we need to know why. The next morning, we drove to the train station, the air thick with tension. I left David and Miriam in the car, promising to call if anything went wrong. The station was deserted, the echoes of old journeys lingering in the air. A man waited on the platform, his face lined with age and secrets. "You're Franklin Hayes," he said, his accent unmistakable. "I am Jacob Weiss, Miriam's nephew. I've been searching for the jewels for years. They belong to my family." I studied his face, searching for truth. "Why now?" Jacob's eyes filled with sorrow. "Because I heard what happened. Because I want to make things right." He handed me a folder, documents, photos, proof of the jewel's origins. "I don't want money. I want closure." I nodded, understanding. "Let's do this together." As we left the station, I realized that the shadow of the past was not just a threat, but an opportunity, a chance to heal old wounds, to honor my wife's legacy, and to build something new from the ashes of loss. The real test was still ahead, but for the first time, I felt hope. The past was not finished with us, but neither were we finished with it. The morning at the train station marked a turning point, not just for the mystery of the necklace, but for the tangled history that had haunted both my family and Miriam's for generations. Jacob Weiss was nothing like the shadowy figure I'd feared. His handshake was firm, his eyes clear, and his grief for the past as real as my own. We sat together in a quiet corner of the station cafe, the folder of documents spread between us. Jacob explained how, after the war, his mother and Miriam's had hidden the jewels, hoping to keep them safe from both thieves and the authorities who would have seized them as unclaimed property. "My mother always believed your wife would find a way to return them," Jacob said, his voice thick with emotion. "But when she died, the trail went cold. I only learned about the necklace when I saw the news about the pawn shop." Miriam listened, her hand trembling in mine, as Jacob produced a list of names, distant relatives, old friends, people who had helped hide the family's treasures. "Some of them are still alive," he said. "But there are others who would do anything to get their hands on what's left." The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders. I realized that the jewels were more than just valuable. They were a legacy, a symbol of survival, and a target for anyone desperate or greedy enough to chase old ghosts. Carter joined us, his legal mind already spinning through the possibilities. "We need to secure the jewels, document their provenance, and decide together what happens next. If we're not careful, this could turn into a legal nightmare, or worse." David, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "I want to help. I want to make things right." For the first time, I saw my son not as a boy who'd made a terrible mistake, but as a man willing to face the consequences and fight for something bigger than himself. We agreed to move the jewels to a secure vault at Carter's firm, with Miriam and Jacob as co-signers. That afternoon, we met at the law office, the tension in the air palpable as Carter photographed and cataloged each piece, recording every detail for the historical record. As we worked, I felt a strange sense of peace, like the act of sharing the burden was itself a kind of healing. Miriam and Jacob told stories of their families, of the courage and fear that had shaped their lives, and I realized that the necklace had done more than connect us to the past. It had given us a chance to build a new future, one rooted in truth and trust. As the sun set over the city, we locked the vault and made a pact. We would protect the jewels, honor our families, and use whatever came from their sale or donation to support causes that mattered: refugee aid, education, and the preservation of history. That night, as I sat with David and Miriam in the quiet of the farmhouse, I felt the old wounds begin to close. The alliance we'd formed was fragile, but it was real. The past was no longer a threat, but a guide. And as I drifted off to sleep, I knew that the real test was still ahead, a final confrontation with those who would stop at nothing to claim the legacy for themselves. The days that followed our alliance with Jacob and Miriam were a blur of anxious planning and cautious hope. Carter worked overtime, filing paperwork to secure the jewels' provenance and drafting statements for the press, while David and I spent long hours cataloging every piece, photographing each stone and setting, and recording the stories Miriam and Jacob remembered from their childhoods. The sense of purpose was new, but so was the fear. We all knew that the more people learned about the jewels, the more dangerous things could become. That fear became real one evening when I returned home to find a note taped to the front door. The handwriting was blocky, the message simple: "You're making a mistake. The past belongs to those who can pay for it." My hands shook as I read it, the threat as clear as the chill in the air. I called Carter, who insisted we notify the police. "This isn't just about history anymore, Franklin. Someone wants those jewels, and they're willing to scare you to get them." The police took the threat seriously, increasing patrols around the farm and installing a new security system. But the sense of safety was gone. That night, as I sat with David and Miriam in the kitchen, the weight of responsibility pressed down on me. "Maybe we should just give them up," David said, his voice small. "Maybe it's not worth the risk." Miriam shook her head, her eyes fierce. "If we give in to fear, we lose everything our families fought for." Jacob agreed, his voice steady. "We do this together, or not at all." I looked at my son, seeing the fear and the courage warring in his eyes. "We're not running," I said quietly. "We're going to finish what your mother started." The next day, Carter arranged a press conference at the law office. The room was packed with reporters, the air electric with curiosity and skepticism. Carter laid out the evidence, photos, documents, the story of the necklace and the hidden jewels. Miriam and Jacob spoke, their voices trembling but proud, telling the world about the families who had risked everything to save a piece of their heritage. I spoke last, my words simple but firm. This isn't just about money or history. It's about dignity, about honoring the past, and about refusing to let fear dictate our future. The story made headlines, and the outpouring of support from the community was overwhelming. But the threats didn't stop. Anonymous calls, strange cars parked at the end of the drive, even a break-in at Carter's office. Nothing was taken, but the message was clear. We were being watched. That night, as I sat by the window, the farm quiet around me, I realized that the real battle was not just for the jewels, but for the soul of our family. The threat was real, but so was our resolve. We would not be bullied, not by the past, not by greed, not by fear. The next move was ours, and I was ready to make it, silently, strategically, and with the strength my wife had left me, hidden in the heart of a diamond necklace. The plan came together in Carter's office, the air thick with tension as we mapped out every detail. The threats had grown bolder. Another note slipped under the barn door, a car idling at the end of the lane late at night, a stranger spotted near the law firm's vault. Carter, ever the strategist, suggested we set a trap, announce a private viewing of the jewels for a select group of historians and potential donors, but secretly invite the police and a trusted security team to watch from the shadows. Miriam and Jacob agreed, their nerves masked by a determination that reminded me of my late wife. David, still wrestling with guilt but eager to prove himself, volunteered to act as the host, greeting guests and keeping an eye out for anyone suspicious. The night of the event, the farmhouse was transformed, candles flickered in the windows, the dining room table gleamed with velvet-lined cases, and the air buzzed with anticipation. The guests arrived in a flurry of handshakes and polite conversation, their curiosity barely contained. Among them, I spotted a man in a dark coat, his eyes cold and calculating, who lingered near the display, never straying far from the exit. As the evening wore on, Carter gave a short speech about the history of the jewels, the courage of the families who had hidden them, and the importance of preserving their legacy. The man in the coat grew restless, glancing at his watch, his hand never far from his pocket. Suddenly, as Carter finished his remarks, the lights flickered and went out. In the confusion, I heard a crash. The case holding the necklace had been smashed open. David shouted, "Stop him," and chaos erupted. The man in the coat bolted for the door, but two plainclothes officers tackled him before he could escape, the necklace clutched in his fist. The room erupted in shouts and gasps as the police cuffed him and led him away. Carter quickly restored order, reassuring the guests and securing the jewels. The police found a gun and a forged ID on the would-be thief, confirming our fears that the threats had been real, and that the danger had come from someone who had been watching us for weeks. As the adrenaline faded, I looked at David, his face pale but determined, and felt a surge of pride. He had faced his fear, protected his family, and helped save the legacy his mother had hidden for so long. Miriam and Jacob hugged me, their relief palpable. "We did it," Miriam whispered. "We kept our promise." That night, as the guests departed and the house grew quiet, I sat by the fire with David, Carter, and our new friends, the necklace safe in its case. We talked about the journey, the secrets, the betrayals, the courage it had taken to face the past and protect the future. I realized that the confrontation had been more than a battle for jewels. It had been a test of character, of family, and of the strength that comes from standing together. The danger was over, but the story was not yet finished. The next day, we would decide what to do with the jewels, and with the legacy that had brought us all together. The morning after the attempted theft, the farmhouse was filled with a strange, quiet energy, a mix of relief, exhaustion, and the sense that something profound had shifted. The necklace and jewels were safe, locked away in Carter's vault, but the real treasure was the bond that had formed between all of us, me, David, Miriam, Jacob, and even Carter, who had become more than just a lawyer. Over breakfast, we gathered around the kitchen table, the sunlight streaming in, the air thick with the smell of coffee and fresh bread. Miriam brought out the leather-bound journal my wife had left in the safety deposit box, her hands reverent as she turned the pages. "There's something you need to see," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. She read aloud a passage my wife had written years before, long before the necklace was ever pawned, long before secrets and fear had driven us apart. "If you find this, it means the past has caught up with us. I want the jewels to be used for good, not to be hidden, not to be fought over, but to help those who have lost everything, as we once did. If you can, please donate them to the refugee fund in my mother's name. And if David is with you, tell him I forgive him. Tell him I love him, no matter what." The words hit me like a wave, the pain and love in every line a reminder of the woman I'd lost and the legacy she'd hoped to leave behind. David's eyes filled with tears as he listened, his guilt and shame finally giving way to something softer, acceptance, and the hope of redemption. "I never knew," he whispered. "I thought I'd ruined everything." I put my arm around him, my own voice thick with emotion. "You didn't ruin anything, son. You brought us here. You gave us a chance to do the right thing." Jacob and Miriam nodded, their faces shining with relief and gratitude. Carter smiled, his eyes misty. "It's a rare thing, to see a family come together like this. Your wife would be proud." That afternoon, we met with the directors of the Refugee Fund, presenting the jewels and the journal as a gift in my wife's memory. The story made headlines, but this time, the focus was on hope, on healing, on the power of forgiveness and the courage to honor the past by building a better future. The community rallied around us, neighbors and strangers alike offering support, sharing their own stories, and helping us turn pain into purpose. As the sun set over the farm, I sat on the porch with David, the air alive with the sounds of laughter and the promise of new beginnings. The secret wish my wife had hidden in the necklace had changed everything, not just for us, but for everyone whose lives the jewels would touch. The journey was almost over, but the legacy of love, forgiveness, and resilience would endure for generations to come. The day of the memorial dawned bright and clear, the sky a brilliant blue above the fields that had seen so much pain and healing. Franklin woke early, his heart full of anticipation and a bittersweet ache. He and David spent the morning setting up chairs beneath the old oak tree, arranging flowers and photographs of his late wife, images of her laughing in the garden, holding a newborn David, standing arm in arm with Miriam and Jacob's family in a world that seemed impossibly far away. The community arrived in waves, neighbors bringing casseroles and pies, children running through the grass, and even a few strangers who had read about the story in the paper and wanted to pay their respects. Miriam and Jacob stood with Franklin at the edge of the crowd, their faces shining with pride and gratitude. Carter and Evelyn arrived, their arms full of letters from the Refugee Fund, each one a testament to the lives changed by the jewels and the legacy Franklin's wife had left behind. As the service began, Franklin took the stage, his voice steady as he spoke of love, loss, and the power of forgiveness. "My wife taught me that the greatest inheritance is not money or jewels, but the courage to forgive and the strength to begin again. Today, we honor her wish, not by holding on to the past, but by building a future where hope is possible for everyone." The crowd listened in silence, the weight of his words settling over them like a blessing. David spoke next, his voice trembling but strong. "I made mistakes. I let my own pain blind me to what mattered most. But my mother's love, and my father's forgiveness, gave me a second chance. I promise to honor that, every day." The applause was warm, the hugs genuine, and as the sun dipped low, the community gathered for a meal, sharing stories and laughter, the pain of old wounds now woven into the fabric of something new. That night, as Franklin and David sat on the porch, the stars bright above, they talked about the future, about the farm, the family, and the promise to keep building, one day at a time. The memorial was more than a farewell, it was a celebration of resilience, a declaration that the past would not define them, and a promise that the legacy of love, forgiveness, and hope would endure for generations to come. The morning after the memorial, Franklin Hayes woke to the gentle light of dawn spilling across the farmhouse floor, the air filled with the scent of fresh earth and the distant sound of birdsong. He moved through the quiet house, pausing in the kitchen to pour a cup of coffee, his heart lighter than it had been in years. David was already outside, tending to the garden, his laughter mingling with the voices of neighbors who had stayed to help plant a new row of apple trees in honor of Franklin's late wife. The farm, once a place of secrets and sorrow, now pulsed with life and hope. Franklin joined David in the garden, the two of them working side by side, their conversation easy and full of plans for the future. "I want to start a scholarship in Mom's name," David said, wiping sweat from his brow. "For kids who need a second chance, just like we did." Franklin smiled, pride swelling in his chest. "She'd love that, son. She always believed in helping others find their way." As the day wore on, more friends and family arrived, bringing food, stories, and laughter. Miriam and Jacob helped organize a community lunch, their bond with Franklin and David now as strong as family. Carter and Evelyn stopped by with news that the refugee fund had already begun to change lives, the Jules' legacy reaching far beyond the farm. As the sun set, Franklin stood on the porch, watching the fields glow gold in the fading light. He thought of the journey that had brought them here, the pain, the betrayal, the courage to forgive and begin again. He realized that the true inheritance was not the jewels or the money, but the love and resilience that had carried them through every storm. David joined him, his arm around his father's shoulders. "We did it, Dad. We really did." Franklin nodded, his heart full. "We did it together, son. And we'll keep doing it, one day at a time." The pain of the past would never fully disappear, but it no longer defined them. Instead, they chose to remember the lessons learned, that dignity is worth fighting for, that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, and that the truest legacy is the family you build, the lives you touch, and the courage to hope. As the stars appeared overhead and the world grew quiet, Franklin closed his eyes, grateful for the journey, and ready for whatever tomorrow might bring, knowing that, at last, the Hayes legacy would endure for generations to come. Spring arrived in a rush of green and gold, the Hayes farm bursting with new life as Franklin and David prepared for the first of what would become a cherished family tradition, a gathering to celebrate not just the land, but the journey that had brought them all home. The house was alive with laughter and the clatter of dishes as Emily arrived with her children, their joy infectious as they raced through the orchard and helped Mark set up tables beneath the old oak tree. Miriam and Jacob came with baskets of fresh bread and stories from town, their friendship now woven into the fabric of the family. Carter and Evelyn brought news of the scholarship fund's first recipients, their pride in the Hayes legacy clear in every word. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of gold and lavender, Franklin stood at the head of a long table set with food and flowers, his heart full as he looked out at the faces of those he loved, David, Emily, the grandchildren, friends old and new. "This farm has seen its share of storms," he began, his voice steady. "But it's also seen the power of forgiveness, the strength of family, and the hope that comes from never giving up. We've learned that legacy isn't just about land or money, it's about the people you love, the lessons you pass on, and the courage to start again, no matter how many times you fall." The family listened in silence, the firelight flickering in their eyes, the pain of old wounds now woven into the fabric of their story. David raised his glass, his voice thick with emotion. "To Dad, for teaching us what it means to fight for what matters. For showing us that dignity is worth more than pride, and that the greatest revenge is living well." The toast was echoed around the table, laughter and tears mingling as the feast began. As the night wore on, Franklin sat back and watched his family, stronger, wiser, and more united than ever. He thought of the letter from Brittany, of the forgiveness that had set them free, of the community that had rallied around them, and of the land that would one day belong to David and his children. The pain of the past would never fully disappear, but it no longer defined them. Instead, they chose to remember the lessons learned, that hope is a choice, that love is a gift, and that the truest legacy is the family you build, the lives you touch, and the courage to forgive. As the stars appeared overhead and the world grew quiet, Franklin closed his eyes, grateful for the journey, and ready for whatever tomorrow might bring, knowing that, at last, the Hayes legacy would endure for generations to come.